Welcome to this episode of Circle Back. I'm your host, Sam Davidson. Today, we've got Mark Montgomery. A lot of folks know him from the music industry, from the tech space, definitely from the entrepreneurship space here in Nashville. We have an awesome conversation. We look at the very beginnings of his entrepreneurial journey, from cutting yards in Wisconsin all the way through developing software, sweeping floors at a vinyl pressing factory as one of his first jobs in Nashville, to growing and selling companies for a lot of money. We cover the ins and outs of entrepreneurship, but the ins and outs of life. We talk about grief, we talk about hustle culture, and of course we talk about what Mark is doing now, because he's up to something. Thanks for tuning in today. You're going to love this episode. As always, a big thank you to the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family, as well as our friends at Nashville Post for making these episodes possible. Tune in. So my guest today is Mark Montgomery. Mark, welcome to the studio.
Hi, glad to be here with you, Sam.
Let's kick things off. Tell us the first entrepreneurial thing you ever did.
So the first entrepreneurial thing I ever did was start I know this is going to be really glamorous. I had a lawn care business.
Perfect.
And I started it when I was 13. And I learned my first sort of really valuable lesson around the scaling of something like that, in the sense that you go door to door, can I cut your lawn, right? And at some point, my father tapped me on the shoulder and he said, you know, there's real estate companies that have 10 lawns that need to be cut and it's only one door to knock on. Maybe think about doing that. And I did that. And I realized that really it's B2B sales, right? But I realized that with the same amount of effort, I had a much higher likelihood of getting more work by targeting the right ask as opposed to. So, you know, at the tender age of 13, I learned that lesson of B2B sales.
That's early to learn that. How much was a yard back then? What did you charge?
Oh, I think it was $5.
Great.
I had a great flyer. It had a guarantee. You saw the flyer.
Yeah.
It had a guarantee. I had a hefty bag endorsement at the time. One of the first lawn care companies to secure a hefty. Yep. So, and you know, I did that, and it was a really, to me, it was a really valuable lesson just in, I could, right? It's like, oh, well, why couldn't I?
Yeah. And where was that?
That was Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Okay. And
Go Packers.
Go Packers. And then what happened after that? How long did you do that? Did it ignite something of like, this is going to be a career, or was it still just sort of like?
No, so it was, I mean, for me, it was really about spending money. You know, I was lucky to come up in a sort of a middle class family, so we didn't really want for anything from a financial perspective. But my dad felt it was important that I think both my parents, that I learned to work. From there, I did that for a couple of years. I also learned the very valuable lesson of it's very hard to find good help, and that if you are the owner, that if someone doesn't show up, it's on you. So you need to know how everything works, really. Then I started this for a minute. I got interested in computers very early and started a company or a platform called the Computer Tutor. And I lived pretty near to a very wealthy suburb. And I built some flyers and I sent them around, and basically I taught rich people's kids and them how to use their Apple computers that they had bought and had no idea what they were.
And that was high school?
That was high school. And at the time I was also part of a software pirating ring. We would hack, back in the old days when you had 5 1/4-inch floppy disks. So we would remove copy protection, strip out EA's logo, put ours in, and then redistribute for free. That was an interesting moment. It fed definitely into my work in music around piracy later.
Sure.
So that was a minute, and then kind of the last one in kind of my teens, or right at my 20th year, I went to Alaska and worked in the commercial fishing industry. And there were 8 of us originally that did that. And then it dwindled to 6, and then it dwindled to 4. And the last year and I wasn't part of the last couple of years, the last year that group went, 2 of those died. Very dangerous work. It also taught me there was nothing I couldn't do, because when you do that job, you are literally getting up at 5 a.m. and you're working till 2. And then you got 3 hours and you're back at it. And it's 90 days of that, just straight every waking moment. And, I think anyone could do it. Had I been really warned, I'm not sure I would have gone. But it was really valuable experience. And there was the guy that I work for there told me he said very plainly, he said, look, there's not a job that I'm going to ask you to do here that I won't do myself. And I carried that lesson through my entire career.
And so how did you go from dangerous fishing boat in Alaska to then what do you do after that?
Well, I mean, when you make the kind of money you made there, you buy some guitar, you buy a couple guitars, you buy some amps, and I was not a great student generally. So what I did was I basically paid for my college and partied my ass off for the next several years. I got a degree really more in that was the period of time where I started really focusing on building a band and like that whole thing. Is interestingly, I just finished Alex Van Halen's book Brothers, which so it's like reading the story of the life you hoped you would have if you were a guitar player in the 80s, right? I'm still actively, to me, that is a lifelong pursuit of trying to get out of my head to my fingers. What is that thing? What am I trying to express? And I think today it's a lot different today than it was back in the day. Back in the day, it was really just about, if I'm just being honest, it was about girls. Mm-hmm. And so coming out of high school and then into college, my focus was primarily on trying to be a rock and roll musician. That's where that all kind of gestated.
So even with this lawn care to software or the computer tutelage to illegal software to Alaska fishing boats, you were still like, I'm just gonna play music, man.
Oh, dude! Like I moved here in 1990 with $800. My drummer, a girl who was wanted in 2 states, which I didn't know about until we got here. Yeah, I mean, it for me, that was, and when you think about it, if you're a musician, particularly if you're kind of in a position of control, generally it's the lead singer or the guitar player, you're the entrepreneur. And in a lot of the abstracts of what you and I are involved in every day, are very much the same in music. And when you get to certain scale, I've been lucky to work with some enormous artists over my career. Some of these folks employ a couple hundred people, and they are the CEO of their entities. And so the abstracts are actually quite similar, whether you're trying to build a band or whether you're trying to build a company.
And was the plan, you wanted to be a rock and roll musician, to be rich, to be famous, to be neither?
Yes,
to be,
yes.
Yeah, what ended up happening to that?
Well, I mean, so what happened is I got close once. Was we used
close
to say,
meaning like sign?
Yeah,
like
we're
a
big
deal?
in Japan. Yeah,
Okay,
we were big in Japan,
Great.
right? And this was yes, it was unabashed hair metal. So there's no grass growing on this busy street anymore, but there was. And part of that was going on the road. And I was pretty unaware, but interestingly, I was aware enough to recognize that I didn't like laying my head in a different bed every night. And it was not, I could just tell that it wasn't going to be for me. And so, at that moment I went, I need another plan. And that other plan became, I'm going to become a session guitar player.
And how old were you then?
I would have been about 26.
Okay.
And keep in mind, when you live in your own world, right? You see everything through your own lens, and you don't really. When you say that out loud, you say, "I'm going to be a session guitar player." You say it out loud, and you don't even know what that means, really, right? Steve Lukather is a notable session guitar player. Brent, there's I mean, anyway, it's a totally different world.
Mm-hmm.
So dummy here packs up his shit, right? And shows up here with enough 2 months rent. And back in the day, again, dating myself, we got our apartment, or actually we had a house. We got our house by sending a check to the Tennessean, who then sent us a copy of the paper. That was how you found right back in the day.
That's right.
So we end up off of Nolensville Road, and it was a rude awakening. The first session I did, I was lucky enough to sit next to a guy who today is top call.
Mm-hmm.
He's certainly U.S. top call. My reality distortion field got a rude awakening, which is I was not the guitar player I thought I was.
Sure.
And I made it through that session and walked out of there going, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
Like there was no going back, right? And that was where I turned back to lawn care,
mm-hmm.
Of sorts. And that started the journey of becoming a founder and an entrepreneur. Really, since 1991, I have employed myself on ideas that I've created and brought into the world.
And so at that moment, you're leaving the session and you're like, this is not going to work out. You said there's no going back, but did you think about going back, whether it's to Wisconsin
no,
or
hell,
to anything else?
Fucking no, pardon my French. No way.
Because why?
Well, why? Why would I go?
If you're going to do lawn care, you can do it in lots of
I don't
places.
want to do lawn care.
Okay. That was just,
right. Yeah.
lawn care was the thing of, okay, here's an option. I
and
gotta eat.
the other thing is, and maybe I omitted this, music for me was a very potent, when I was young, music saved my life.
Okay.
And when you're in this crazy reality and Jim Morrison makes more sense to you than your parents, you're in trouble, right? So it had become a thing, and it really has never left. And I have watched music transform other people's lives. I've also been inside where the sausage is made, and it's not real pretty at times, right? Sure. And so but for me, the thing I love about music is that it is forever morphing. It never stays the same. There was a minute where everybody's like, we're going to run out of notes. We've run all the possible combinations. It's like, I don't think that's that's right. And so that got in there, and then that started driving what I got involved in. Right. So once I was sure I wanted to do music, and I was pretty damn sure I was not going to be Keith Urban or Brent Mason, I wanted to be around it. I wanted to be part of it, but I also recognized where I was not going to be successful.
And how did Nashville factor into, I want to be around music? So you didn't want to be on tour every night. I want to play in studios, because Nashville had a lot of them and you were close enough.
Well, I mean, I wished it was more complicated than this. Quite simply, Nashville seemed the least threatening of the major music centers, right? Okay. So LA was daunting. New York was daunting. This was a little friendlier. At the time, it was still pretty small. It had kind of developed its reputation as the third coast because of its relationship to the recording industry. What's interesting about this city that I wished I had the foresight to see was its relationship geographically to the country is really important. It sits at the nexus of the two major thoroughfares, north and south and east and west, right? All the infrastructure is here, and you're within 60% of the US population on a 1 day's drive.
Yeah.
So when you look today and you look at who all is based here, I mean, every freaking old heavy metal guy is here, like the country business, the pop business, and there's everything else you need to be in that industry in a way that I don't think, at the time it wasn't as obvious as it is now.
Sure.
And what you see now is everybody and their brother coming here because of these other factors.
And what was it that complex of a decision for you?
No.
Right? No.
No, it was easy.
So let's go play music. Here's where we'll go.
So
what was in the lapse between you leave the studio session, I got to make money, and then you said in 91 you started paying for yourself, paying your way with your own ideas. How much time was in between those two?
About 2 weeks. I mean, I had to do something. Yeah. I wasn't going to make rent. And so I got a job working for Jimmy Lenahan. Jimmy owned vinyl pressing plants, and I swept the floor. I didn't have a car. I got a car soon thereafter when the city bus that I was riding got raided by the police because there was a drug dealer on the bus and guns drawn, the whole thing. And when I was, sharing this with my mother, basically I could hear, she put the phone down and I could hear her telling my dad that he was going to get me a car.
There you go.
It also blew hot air all the time. So anyway, it wasn't a Porsche. But I would say that out of desperation, I wanted to get anywhere near anything that was the music business. And at that point it was vinyl pressing.
And then how long were you sweeping floors between something else happened, especially I got to start something?
Yeah. So I started sweeping floors. Then I took a second job on the graveyard shift, became a bin loop mastering engineer, which I didn't know how to do. So I'm teaching myself as I go. And then finally, this was back in the day when CDs were brand new. And so I would work a day shift and then I would work at night. And so I was around that place all the time, and I started really paying attention to what was going on. And I realized that they were effectively brokering CDs. They weren't making them. They were telling people they made them. They didn't make them. They were assembling them in the back room, right, with the day labor force.
Assembling the
jewel case and but the CDs were coming from Sinram in Canada at the time. And I started noticing that the margins were ridiculous at the time, right? Like almost inexcusably ridiculous, right? And so I went to the owner and I said, "Hey, I might be able to help develop some business for these compact discs that you're hawking." And so he agreed to let me on a commission basis sell. But I made a really bad deal on my behalf, right? And so after about 6 months of doing that, I'm coming into the office and I'm sitting in these meetings and I'm beating everybody in the room, including the head of sales who's driving a Jaguar, right? And I'm driving a Pontiac 6000 STE that frickin' blows hot air all the time. And I'm like, what am I doing? And so I went into Jim's office one day after one of these meetings, and I said, "Look, man," I said, "I think I made a really bad deal on my behalf, and I want to change it." And he told me to go make love to myself. Oh, okay. So I did, and I quit on the spot, and I bought a Mac Color Classic, which I still own, and I ran an 800 number into my apartment, and I started a CD manufacturing brokerage called Empire Arts. And within a year, I had a giant book of business, and I took that and parlayed it into ownership in a full facility. And then we took that facility from kind of it just was what it was. Yeah. I mean, it had several $1 million worth of gear in it. We made big records for big artists.
Where was that?
It was in Brentwood. It used to be called the Toy Box. It was Tom T. Hall's old studio. Okay. And then as this thing grew, we started what I would consider to be today would be coined as artist services. Yep. So you could walk in the front door with nothing, and you could walk out the back door with a distribution deal, with your product, right? With kind of with everything. And then in 1993, back to my hacker roots, I started building publicly facing websites because I thought the internet was the coolest thing I had ever seen, right? And that's back in the day when it was 22 baud modems, right? This is ancient fucking history. So in doing that, I got, first I put our website up, the studio's website, and everybody's like, why do we need what do we need an email for? Why do we need a website? And then we got our first booking. And I'm like, this is why. Right? Yeah. Boom. And then soon thereafter, I started working with a band called the Floating Men, who are still making records today. And they had been signed. They were nearly hot shit. They had a really bad experience, but they had a huge 75,000 person physical mailing list. This is, again, back in the day, right? And I was neighbors with the bass player. And we started talking, and slowly but surely, we came to an agreement that this artist services thing was the way to go, and so on and so forth. And we ended up agreeing, we're going to make your next record, and we're going to build an e-commerce platform to support selling music directly to your fans, which in 1993-4 was ridiculous. It was lunacy. And that turned into April 20th, 1995, we launched 4 months before Amazon opened their doors, a direct-to-consumer music platform play.
How many artists were on there?
Just one to start, right? Okay. And the Floating Men, and we opened the door to that at midnight. And what was interesting is it was really more about the marketing than it was about the e-commerce. It was about telling the story. So we sent a final mail, physical mail to their fan base and said, this is the last time you're ever going to get a piece of mail from us. If you still love this band, come to the website and sign up. And then we took them over the course of that record being made through the process of showing them how it was made and letting them listen to early versions, et cetera, et cetera. And that April 20th moment at midnight, when we opened up that commerce portal, which, by the way, was duct taped together. You know, when I went to get a merchant number in Tennessee, they were like, "You want to sell what on the where?" We had got it in California, and the boys at Telelink, who were friends of mine, enabled the e-com. So basically, it was me standing on their desks saying, "We have to do this," and between us, we put together this solution that allowed us to take money. And I sat there for the first 2 hours at midnight and watched the orders pour in. And I'm like, what in the hell is this?
People on dial-up.
On dial-up.
Buying.
Back in the day when newspapers had full-page ads saying, don't put your credit card in the internet.
Yeah.
Right? And it was like, holy shit. And that was the moment. And from there, we grew the platform. And then about 96, 97, I was watching Pro Tools start to expand its market share, and we were running big old machines, right? Mitsu X850s, Studer 24, like big systems. And my partners were wanting to double down into more of that. And I was like, this is the wrong path. Consumers want portability and convenience. They don't give a shit about fidelity. Most of them can't even hear key, right? So that's not what they're interested in. And we started arguing about which direction we were gonna go. And in 1999, I think I won the argument in the sense that I said, look, I'm done. I'm taking what I helped build here and leaving. And it can be ugly or it can be amenable. You pick, but I'm not staying. Yeah. And we ended up splitting the company up into pieces, and we took the e-com business, the brand business, the distribution business, right? We took all the shit that was going to matter, and they took the recording studio. And now that recording studio is a doggy daycare.
Oh, great. Well, there's opportunity in that. In the 90s, as this is happening, because we covered a lot there, but sort of that decade for you, just hearing that story, it seems like you had an ability to see an opportunity and then sort of say, why not? We'll figure it out. So back to the earlier thinking like the owner, the only person showing up sometimes. A, is that true? And then B, during that time, are you happy? Are you making money? Is this what you want to do? Where you thought you'd be? What was going on with Mark during that decade?
Well, so let's take those. Those are great questions. Let's take them one by one. So where was Mark? Mark was building his suit of armor that you need to play the game that we play. Finding, which breastplate fit best, all that stuff. He was too busy to really pay attention to how he felt. So I for a long time was a human doing, and I learned growing up in my house that it was about what you accomplished. It was about what you earned, and that's how you measured yourself. And so I was intent on, I mean, here's the kind of the funny little, the way I have described it to people, I wanted to be Steve Jobs. Turns out I'm Steve Jones. and that's okay,
Sure.
right? Steve Jobs is an anomaly,
yeah.
right? And a standard that no one can live to, right, except Steve Jobs, and die to, yeah, right? So the how I was living the effing dream, right? In many ways, but really missing the point in maybe some more human ways. Okay. Was I making money? Sort of. So my view of making money is kind of different. The way that most of us, and you included, earn is like this, right? When we in 1999 we started Echo Music, right, and in 2007 accidentally sold it, right, which was truly an accident. It wasn't really where we had gone out to the public markets to raise money. We were not for sale, but
it happened.
Sometimes the check shows up and you go, oh well, okay, and there's an underlying story to that. But no, I wasn't making a lot of money, but I didn't care. Right. I didn't get married till I was 30. That's a big thing. When I meet people who have the desire, I would call them entrepreneurs initially. Whether they get all the way to the goal or not is another matter. But man, you start out with, and it's no offense to people, but you start out 27, 28 years old and you got 2 kids and you got a wife. You can't play the game the way that it has to be played if you want to create enormous value and enormous exit potential. I just don't think you can. If you do, your kids are going to pay for it, right? And so for me, I never wanted that. I never wanted to be, my dad was gone 7 days a week, and he's 79 years old, and he's still almost the same. He started another company. He's 79. Like what the? So, I think overall it was all good. It was super exciting. The town was growing. Right? Like the whole thing felt like, man, I made the right decision.
And so the town growing because then you could get more artists in to put them through the machine. Yeah.
You got it. Yep. That's exactly right.
And so 99, the splits off.
Yep.
Seems amicable.
It's mostly amicable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't as nasty as it could have
No
been.
one, in my entire career, never been sued, never sued.
Okay.
And that's kind of
that's good. Hang your hat on that.
Particularly when you have my reputation.
Fair. And so that's what kicks off Echo Music.
Yeah. And
then tell us about that journey, how that starts.
So Echo is
because you survived Y2K at that point too.
Yeah, we survived Y2K.
Congrats.
We started that company. The short version is that we were self-funded. We never took outside money until right near the end. And what happened in that company was 90% of what drove our business at the time we opened our doors, because we had existing business that we brought with us, was physical distribution. And about a year into physical distribution, Napster happened. And so you asked this question earlier, and this will sound, I don't want this to sound arrogant. It's not arrogant. I think it just over time has proven to be correct. I have the ability to see around corners. Okay. When you see the first time and you're right, you think it's a fluke. When you do it again, you start to go, oh, maybe I know something. Maybe I have a talent here. And I think I still have that talent. I think it requires you to pay a lot of attention to the markets that you're interested in, which I don't do currently, right? So I'll get to that. But what I saw was, this is the end of 90% of our revenue. The first time I opened Napster, I'm like, we are fucking screwed, right? And so at that moment, we brought in who I really consider to be the technical co-founder of Echo, a guy named Dolly Stepniewski, who is still very active. He's one of the best software architects I have ever come in contact with. And I've been in plenty of rooms with plenty of people. And he and I sat down, and what we were trying to conceive was, how do we take all these disparate data sources that we've got? Because we were still selling music on the internet, right? We had a physical distribution business into retail, but we also then were pickpacking and shipping product to consumers directly. That business never went away. In fact, that grew. And so how do we take all this data we have over here and this data we have over here and this data we have over here? And when you abstract this, we were building Salesforce, but we were building it way before Salesforce. And so over that next couple of years, by 2004, we had built out the underlying IP that became Echo Tools. And we had successfully identified and secured the sale of our physical distribution business, except the pick, pack, and ship for online. So we sold off the thing that was making all of our money and doubled down into digital, which was just coming up, And I remember the former head of Sony once said to me, this was sort of way after the fact, he goes, the simple fact is you taught the hillbillies about digital. And so I was this guy who was always in the room going, what are you talking? Sue your customer. What are you talking about? You're missing the whole point. And so from 03 to like 07, I was the heretic. And in 07, I got really fucking smart all of a sudden because they all woke up and went, oh my God. So like, again, seeing it coming and skating to where it was going, not to where it was.
And so in 07, you mentioned maybe right before that, you're going to raise money.
Yeah. So shorthand is in 06, I ended up participating. So we had a large client who had a record company and they had multiple artists and they were backed by a guy named Rufus Lumry III.
Love it.
Can't make this shit up. And Rufus Lumry was the only LP in a fund based in Seattle called Acorn Ventures. They had investments in OnStar and Coinstar, right? Yeah. Completely unrelated to each other. And Rufus's whole MO as an investor was simple. He bets on timing and team. Your plan's always wrong, right? Unless you got some dipshit in your cap stack, the money's irrelevant, right? If the deal's right and the timing's right and the team is right, go. And I mean, he had 70, 80 investments. There's a wing of Harvard named for him. I mean, he was the CFO of McCaw Cellular, which sold to AT&T in 1991 for $8.6 billion.
In $91.
Yeah.
Wow.
So in $81.
Yeah.
And so I ended up at this retreat on his 20,000 acre game preserve seriously, in the Washington State high desert. And that morning I presented our philosophy and our methodologies to all their artists. They had flown everybody in and presented all that. And then that afternoon, we all went on a hike to the waterfall on his property. Never gets old. And as we're walking along on the trail, he pulls me aside and he says, I really like what you're doing and I want to help you make your dream come true. And I was like, oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks, man.
Wait, what was your
That's
dream?
cool.
Did you have a dream?
I wanted to be Steve Jobs, right? I mean, I wanted to build a giant fucking company. And he.
So at that point, you were sold on. Big as possible.
And I was
like
also
publicly traded, like big.
Big.
Okay.
And I was also, big in music. That was
okay.
Had I recognized what we had built, I would have stopped doing music and done something, right? Because it would have been way bigger. But we were built for musicians.
Okay.
And again, back to that passion. So I leave, I go home and I'm like, don't even think that happened. And we had been thinking about what are we going to do next? How are we going to, because we were essentially from 2004 until we sold, the company doubled in size every 9 months.
Jeez.
So it was like.
So did you need capital?
We didn't until late 2005. In order to get to the next big rung, we needed money.
Okay.
And so I come home and just continue on the way. And about 2 weeks after that, I get a call from his CFO, Karen. She's like, we're confused. And I said, about what? And she said, well, Rufus made you an offer. I was like, okay, right? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So she said, can we put a call together? And so at the time, I had an outsourced CFO, a gentleman named Frank Bumstead, who is gigantic in music. FBMM is the business management firm that he helped found. And our lawyer was Richard Bird at Baker Donaldson back in the day. And so we get a call together, right, with on a Sunday afternoon, and we're sitting in our conference room, and they're sitting in their conference room, and we're, talking about the situation. And Rufus says, "Look, here's my proposal. I'd like to give you $1 million, and I want you to spend it rapidly. And here's what I want you to do with it. I want you to build your market share as fast as you can. I want you to build irrefutable case studies, and if you spend all this money correctly, in about 16 months, you're going to need a whole bunch more, and we'll go get you some." And I'm like, okay. And I said, and so we were talking terms, no board seat, the most friendly freaking deal you're ever going to get in your life. And at one point, Frank says, "Can we put you on hold for a minute?" Puts him on hold. And he turns to me and he goes, "You don't deserve this deal. Take it." Right? Like, fucking take the money.
Yeah.
So we come off speaker and we said, let's paper it. 2 days later, I had $1 million in the bank.
Wow.
And that was a big fucking deal.
What'd you do?
We spent all of it.
Yeah.
We grew our market share. We built multiple irrefutable case studies. And at the end of that period, I called and I would talk to him, once a month.
Yeah.
And he knew everything that was wrong in our company. Like, he knew what he was getting into, and he knew everything that was right. And he knew the timing was right, and he knew the team was right. And that was his bet. And so we, in the conversation about what are we going to do now, he said, look, you need an investment banker. You're going to raise a big chunk of money. So we need to hire a bank. Here's 3 that I've worked with. It's your company. You pick. I mean, again, like, who is this person?
Yeah.
And so we ended up hiring a guy named Doug Hurst, who I'm still friends with today. At the time, I can't remember what firm he was with, but we hired him. We built, basically what we did is we built a model for growth. We built the deck, all the things you do when you hire a banker. And the plan was to go to the market, right, and raise a ton of money, and then grow the business from there. During that process, and this is something that I think is lost on people because you don't think about the human component, all of those bankers, all those people that are involved in that work in New York are all drinking and eating and hanging around in the same, 10 square blocks of each other generally, and the word gets out. So I get a phone call from the head of IAC's M&A. Hey, would you be interested in selling the company? And I'm like, sure. What do I know?
Right.
So I hang up the phone. I call Doug, and Doug's like, this is what I hoped would happen. He goes, you've got an auction on your hands. Now you just need to decide what you want to do here. Right. And so for me, we're 8 years in, right? Started in 99.
Yep.
This is 06, 07. Michael Bertram wrote a great post here recently on LinkedIn about 50-50 partnerships.
Yeah.
I was in a 50-50 partnership, and it served our company really well the first several years because I was the gas and he was the brake. And if it was up to me, I'd have driven us off a cliff. And if it was up to him, we would have never left the garage. Yep. Right. And so that tension provided a good framework, but it got less and less friendly. And at some point I decided I don't want to be in business with this guy anymore. Yeah. And this is the opportunity because now we're for sale. So the next call was to Rufus. Do you care if we sell the company? No, I don't care. Right. As long as the number's right.
Yeah.
And he got 12x his money in 17 months.
That's a good deal.
That's a good return.
Yeah, I'll take that.
So we sort of accidentally sold the company. And what happened was and I've been involved in enough of these now where if you're the founder or the founder CEO or whatever chair you're in and you're in charge, there's a real argument to facilitating the transaction yourself, right?
Okay.
Mostly
Sure.
not paying the banker the fee.
Yeah.
That's the big one,
Yeah.
right? But there's other reasons. And then there's the other school of thought, which is you need an intermediary. You need a bad cop so that when you're involved in this, you can stay focused on running the business and you let the banker handle the rest and you get brought in. And so I chose that. And so his words to me were, you're the hottest girl at the dance, right? So now we want to create an auction. And that's what it turned into. And we inevitably sold to what would become Live Nation Entertainment.
Yeah.
When we were purchased by IAC. IAC, this is a whole other long fucking story. IAC was a holding company owned by Barry Diller. And Diller owned 65 internet-based companies in the portfolio. And when we were bought, we were bought under under the vertical of music, and they had Tickets Now, they had Ticketmaster, they had Get Me, they had all these assets. And what they were going to try to do was to string together a discovery to delivery ecosystem and supplant the record companies, which is what I was doing.
Wow.
That was my real play.
Yeah.
My real play was elimination of these middlemen. The whole time, because when that first time that order came in, and the band, we sold the record for $17.50, the band made $14 of that $17.50, and it's like, oh, okay. So when we sold, we were going to be part of this discovery to delivery ecosystem. 4 months after we were sold, I get a phone call from LA. Hey. You need to get on a plane and be here tomorrow morning. We're having a meeting of the Wooden Group. I'm like, okay, what's the Wooden Group? You'll see when you get here. I show up in LA. We're in this big ass room, and it's all, they had bought like 9 companies. It's all the founders, and then it's all the brass from all of the interested parties. And they announce all these plans we had, they're all out the window. We're not doing any of that. Diller decided to break IAC up and recap it. They own Vimeo. They own service merchandise, right? So he basically took these entities in 4 verticals, and then they started spinning the companies out.
I see.
So how we ended up part of Ticketmaster, and then right on the heels part of Live Nation, was there was a deal consummated in the back room between Ticketmaster and Live Nation before we were bought. So the thing was already in play. And you end up with, and again, this is like a music history lesson. At the time, you know who Irving Azoff is? So do you know what it is? You know?
No.
Okay, so you know what he did or what he does. He's a manager. He manages a little band called the Eagles.
Yeah, sure.
And to quote Don Henley, yeah, Irving's a snake, but he's our snake.
Okay.
And I'm fortunate to be friends with and be mentored by one of the original founding members of the Eagles. And Irving's got quite a reputation. So I'm now faced off against Irving and Michael Rapino, who are 2 of the baddest dudes in the fucking music business. And, you know, I have an agreement. I don't like what's happening, right? I was so naive and so... I believed so much of my own reality distortion field that I believed I had convinced myself that I could remake the most hated brand on the planet, Ticketmaster, and I made a grab for power, and I lost.
Okay.
Right? And I got shown the side door. And so on my way out the door, they were nice enough to tell me that they had no intention of honoring the deal that we had, and that if I wanted to get paid again, that I'd have to come and get it. And
which
so,
looks like what?
Well, which looks like hiring a lawyer or
Got
5.
Got it.
And then facing off against guys who, you don't really, these are bad dudes. They're bad dudes.
Yeah.
And I basically said, okay. I said, and I said, by the way, I think you forgot the last reason you bought my company. And I'm in this meeting and they're basically telling me they're going to fuck me.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, the thing you've forgotten is I never fucking give up, and you're going to pay me. And they did. 14 months later, they tried to run me out of money, right? Which they didn't succeed at. They, all I did was enforce the agreement we had, right? And the brilliance of this, which was sort of accidental, is the first day that I got inbound interest in selling the company, I went to my head of IT and I said, I want you to set up a blind copy for every email that comes to my corporate email address. I want it going to my personal email address as well. So by the time this was all done, I had everything. So when we ended up enforcing the agreement we had, we're at Houlihan Lokey. They're cutting the baby up with the bathwater, because basically what the deal says is if you can't agree to price, if you're not within a certain range, a third party will determine value.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
They presented a 5-page presentation in that Houlihan Lokey exchange. I had a 300-page binder with everything. Yeah. And 16 days in, I get a call from Houlihan Lokey. We need to have a call with everybody, you know, to discuss our findings. And I was hoping he would, you know, give me a little bit of a, and he's like, I think you're going to be pleased with the result. And I was like, okay. Yep. Right. And so that really was, it was the end of an era. Yeah. I mean, when you spend almost 10 years throwing back to making almost no money, right? Yeah. The first time I ever hired somebody and paid them more than me, I knew I was doing it right. Got it. Right. Because I learned it's gotta be, this is not about me. It's gotta be about everybody else. My job is to be behind it, moving it. And then occasionally being the tip of the spear. Yeah. And so, you know, my payday was good. The first one was great. The second one was not as good as I would have hoped it would be. The first one I lost to my ex-wife. Divorce is expensive because it's worth it, kids. And get a prenup.
Uncle
sorry.
Mark, a little advice from
Little
Uncle Mark.
advice for Uncle Mark. Yep.
And so that dust settles, and then you're like, all right, what's next? Or all right, I'm done. I'm gonna hang out. I'm gonna like what goes through your head then? Because that's a big victory
and a big loss and a huge amount of grief. Watching 10 years of your work being torn down. Yeah, that's fair. Maliciously, quite frankly, because the part of what they did to try to devalue the entity was they started dismantling it. Yeah, I get it. Right. So like it wasn't just we're gonna screw you. It's we're gonna screw you. Mm-hmm. And I also know today that wasn't about, they weren't trying to screw me. Mm-hmm. I was just in the way of what they were doing, right? So the short answer is I stayed very busy. So little history lesson on EC. In 2006, I was sitting in a meeting with a bunch of luminaries, right?
That's you, man.
Business leaders.
Yeah.
And I shot my mouth off and ended up on the committee to help start the Center for Entrepreneurship, which came out of that meeting. Yeah, it was, what are we going to do to grow this market? And one of those things was we need to we have a deep entrepreneurial root here. We need to organize around it. We need to organize around it. We need to think about how to focus that energy. That was one of the big pillars. And so during that time, I was involved in sort of the committee work, Schmerling, Bobby Friss, like, you know, all the people that were involved. And part of my job was to identify what should the model look like, right? So you look globally. The Mac Daddy's Y Combinator still is, right? I mean, who else, right? And so it was about trying to figure out what are these various models. So that was sort of one job. My second job was fighting those motherfuckers, right? My third job was working with John and Don at Claritas Capital as their EIR. And that job was interesting because I had never sat on the inside. I had never taken investment money. So I didn't really, because Rufus wasn't really normal. Right. And so I wanted to sit on the other side of the table from the entrepreneur. But I didn't want a job. I didn't want a phone or a desk, and I didn't need a salary. But I wanted to be actively engaged. Yeah. So I got to look at all the deals, the deal that I made with them was I'm going to work on your best investment and your worst investment in my area.
Okay.
So the worst one was a thing called My Outdoor TV, which was a very bad idea. The best one was Studio Now, David Mason's company. I went in and joined his board. At the time I joined the board, they were B2C. And I got them their first big B2B client, and the rest is history. We sold that company to AOL, and then bought it back for like 5 cents on the dollar. And David still owns it. They're still doing it. And so that provided me with kind of the combination of looking at best-in-class accelerators globally around this place, working with the venture guys, and all that other work. And oh, by the way, I didn't mention this. I got divorced from my first wife in 2008-09, and ended up inevitably married to the woman who was on the team that got me divorced from my first wife. And so after we settled the Live Nation thing, I got another big check, and I went kind of back to John and Don, and I said, "Hey, this has been fun, but I don't like pleated pants. I don't really like the country club. Like, they weren't my people."
Yeah.
And frankly, if I was more attuned to the finance side of things, I'd be way wealthier. I don't really care about money. I really don't. What I care about is money is the vehicle for creativity.
Sure.
And that's what it represents to me. And so my wife and I went to the beach for 3 months.
Awesome.
And it was amazing. And I had stacks of mole notebooks full of ideas, right? And so I brought a couple guitars and us and these notebooks. And by the end of the trip, I had a stack of, that's a stupid fucking idea. I had a stack of, oh, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And I had 2 ideas that were like, oh, well, I want to do those. And keep in mind, I was still a human doing. I was still wearing the suit of armor. I was still the man. I was still, now we joke about it in our house. I used to be Mark Montgomery, right? Okay. But I'm not anymore. I'm not that same cat. He's in there. There are pieces of him still lurking around, but I'm not the same guy anymore. And it took a big trauma to wake me up. But as I'm looking at this, basically the idea was a venture accelerator, but it was back in 2010 when there might have been 50 of them.
Yeah.
And what are 2,500, 3,000 of them now? And so in November of 2011, after about 7 months of planning, we opened the doors on what most people consider to be a consultancy. And I stole this. Have you had Joe Galante on this thing yet?
No,
you need to get Joe on here, right? So Joe had this wonderful thing he used to do that I always wondered why no one ever fucking figured this out, right? But it's like, you do need the explicit on this. I apologize. He would tell the market he's going over there, like announce it. And then he'd go the exact opposite way.
Okay.
And he did it over and over, and everybody fell for it every fucking time. It was like, this is so smart. So we opened up our doors and we say we're a consultancy, and we've got Under Armour and Google and Nissan and blah, blah, blah. That wasn't what we were doing. That was a front for starting a venture accelerator. Yeah. And we had, every week we would rev ideas, right? And so we were building a bunch of ideas to think about funding. And we were building a runway so that we didn't have to take money early.
Got it.
Right? Because I didn't want any outside influence. And when we got to a certain point, we had we had a fully baked business, so I didn't really need the money to fund anything except the ideas. And back to this moment at EC, in the early days, the players did not include Ingram. And somewhere in the journey here, John showed up.
Yeah.
And obviously we have all benefited from that family's generosity in this community. And they're truly a unique family, right? And so I got to know John working on the EC project. And I think what he saw was that he watched my feet, not my mouth, right? And he knew that I would do what I said I was going to do. And so we got to a point where we had the first 3 or 4 ideas. The big, hairy, audacious goal was we want to start 12 companies in 18 months.
Wow.
Which is insane.
Yes.
It's insane. That was a stupid fucking idea. And we went to John, and John loved the idea. And then we went to the Turners, and we started, we raised some money, and then we took that money and essentially deployed it against several new co-ideas. We got 9 out of the ground. Of the 9, 5 still exist. There's another story there that is relevant, but those companies, for example, Made In Network, we sold a piece of Made In to a private equity firm and returned 45 IRR to our investors on that deal. We didn't do well on some of the other deals. And when I look back, sort of in retrospect at it, the major flaws to the idea were, one, it was way too dependent on me.
Okay.
Right. So ego was a big factor for me back then. Probably still is. Ego is always going to be a factor. And we were vertically agnostic, which was a mistake, right? Because we were applying, when you're doing consumer products and then you're jumping to digital media and then you're jumping to, I mean, it's all, you're all over the road.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake. And so that allowed, sort of in retrospect, it formed some opinions about the next thing I would do, which we will get to at some point. So the other thing that's germane to this conversation is we opened the doors to Flow in November of 2011. December 1st, my first daughter was born. And December 5th, they told my wife she'd live 1 year. And because Dummy here was the human doing and was full of himself and thought he could conquer anything that was put in front of him, and he believed his wife that she would defeat cancer, we set out to do all this other shit anyway.
12 companies in 18 months.
12 companies in 18 months.
Plus the cancer diagnosis.
Plus the cancer diagnosis, plus a newborn.
How'd that work out?
It didn't work out well.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it was what it took to wake me up. You know, and when I look back at it now, it looks absolutely insane. What we tried to do, it was insanity. And by the way, that is the other tenet of entrepreneurship, as you know. Insanity. Like jumping off a freaking cliff when everything around you says, well, that's crazy, you shouldn't do that. That's absolutely what you do.
So I asked earlier, you would see an opportunity and sort of figure it out. Did that help you at all in that window? 12 companies, newborn diagnosis, figuring it out.
I think that it was sheer will. I think it was a belief that she would beat it. I think you have to have, you can't do it any other way, right? Until it becomes so obvious that it's not going to work.
So she was given a year.
She lived 4.
4.
Yeah. She went into remission once, and then Dummy here stacked another project on top.
Oh, okay.
And built the Ink Building, because what we did here, I always felt like what part of the specialness of this place is the community that it fosters. The downside to what you do is you have a board, you have constituents, right? We were a dictatorship. So I didn't need any permission to do anything.
Yeah.
And so the idea was to put all these companies in the same boat, right? And so everybody would be together.
Yeah.
And that project, inevitably, someone showed up with a check and we got rid of that too.
Yeah.
But that's fine.
Flow or the building or both?
But, so Flow exists. So Flow, so do the building. The building's easy. Building got sold, and then got sold again, and I think it's been sold again.
Sure. It's Pie Town, so yeah. Well,
And I remember when we started that project, and I was bringing people over, and they're like, "That's a homeless shelter right there."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "So what?" Right? And so we sold that. That was easy and obvious. Flow. So I left at the top of 15, and at the time, I was running Flow. I was running one of the companies, and then I was on 6 boards. Wow. And so at the top of 15, I basically went to everybody and said, "I'm leaving, and I don't know when I'm coming back." And she died in July, and we're now we're coming up on 10 years this year. And I can tell you definitively that if I look in the timeline, there are a whole bunch of things that I absolutely did wrong, that I absolutely have made or owe amends to people. It was an incredibly difficult time in my life, and I was not particularly. I was focused on one thing, which is trying to keep her alive, and so everything else just went to the wayside, and then that little girl, who's now 3, her mother's, and, I don't regret the decision of walking away. I know it was the right decision. Sometimes professionally, it's difficult to be around some of my peers who did not have this giant thing and not compare myself. It's hard.
Compare in what way? They have more.
They have more. I mean, if that had all not happened, and if we had been successful in getting 12 out of the ground and we had batted 40%.
But Mark Montgomery would still be here. The human doing would still be here, you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And so the personal loss was one big sort of wellspring of grief. And the professional loss was another that I hadn't really even anticipated or understood. And I would not wish it on my worst enemy. But I have learned an enormous amount through it. And I'm still learning through it, right? 10 years later. When I look at it in the timeline, I can give you a whole bunch of stuff. But when I look at it more abstractly over this 10-year period, I can judge it by one thing. Where's my family unit? I have remarried. My wife adopted our daughter. This morning I was with them filming. My daughter's auditioning on 4 tracks to go to Interlochen for flute, for voice, for musical theater, and for creative writing. Our family is whole. And that's the only thing that matters to me, is that my girl is okay and that our family is okay, and everything else is extraneous. Everything. And that's not a very popular position to take sometimes, because as you probably are aware, grief brings out the worst and the best in people. And it has been quite a journey. and I occasionally will look and go, I should have fucking stuck to it. I should have manned up. I can tell myself this whole story, but my heart knows. And that's the other thing. I wasn't really ever paying attention to this.
Yeah.
Right? I was up here, and now I'm here, and I still use this, but it isn't driving my bus. And I'm working on undoing more and more of it. Yeah. Right? Because it pops back in right away.
So how and when do you reemerge after that? You mentioned 6 boards, all this. Hey, I got to go. You go, your wife passes away. You're raising a very young daughter. What point do you start to re-enter?
I don't think I have, in a way.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is a lot of what I should be doing, quote unquote, should be doing, I just don't do. You know, for my daughter's sake, I'm off social media largely because that shit is corrosive, particularly for young women. So I have to lead by example. So my example is I'm not really participating. I do a little, but not really.
Yeah.
So I guess what I would say is that I feel like for the first time in my life, my priorities are in the right place, and I have my head down doing the work that I have already signed up for, which is plenty. And I'm at a moment. I'll be 58 in June. I've done well, and I have 16 investments sitting out there left of the 30 plus I've made on the first batch, on the first section that has either gone to zero or paid. I'm betting 500.
Wow.
So I'll take those odds.
Yeah.
Right. And yet now, as we kind of come into 25, I'm at a moment where my obligations are going down because this is now working, right? Some of the shit I spent the last couple of years making work, or trying to help make work, have solidified. And so I find myself kind of at the top of this year with, call it 5 hours, 8 hours of weekly obligation.
Okay.
And that's it. And so what am I going to do? And I know what I'm not going to do. And that's as important as knowing. In fact, I'd argue it's more important.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of at this juncture where I go from here is the work really of this first quarter of the year. And I've been laying some tracks, but
yeah. And tell us now about Better Than Booze. So
okay, I feel like we are burning up the hour. We've already burned the hour.
We burned the hour, but that's okay. This is fantastic. Just in terms of, as an example of what you just said about what you do, what you don't do, where you do want to allocate time, and I would argue where you are able still to see around corners.
So using that as the example, I'll say it. I'll start with this. I very much like I learned. I did not want to put my head on a different pillow every night, right? I loved building Echo. I loved the work. I'm really proud of what we built. We had a really good culture. We were doing meaningful work that had real impact on customers. But at the end, I was done. I don't like customers and I don't like employees, which pretty much eliminates me from the operating chair, right?
Sure, right.
So I stepped one rung back. That was my first decision, was I'm just not going to operate again. Okay. Now, this one got me snared in again. Right. It wasn't this one. But here's the short version of how this came to be and where it is. So in 2019, I was looking to invest in a cannabis company, and while I certainly believe that the question of when and how is the question, right? It's not if and when. I knew it was going to be fraught with risk, right? This is going to be gigantic or it's going to be zero, and there's going to be no in between. Because of regulatory? Okay. You've got a 75-year propaganda war. You've got misinformed legislators. I mean, regulators. The whole thing is a shit show. Yep. There's a quote about the music industry. The music business is a long, shallow trench of liars and thieves with a downside, right? The cannabis business makes music look ethical. Oh, okay. I have never been lied to and bullshitted. Yeah. Like it was, I would leave these meetings, I got $500,000, I want to put it to work. And I walk out of these meetings going, absolutely an opportunity, but not with these people. Wow. Right. And finally I met a woman named Tanya Lewis, who you've met. And she's just a really wonderful human. She is. And we started this company together. The notion was basically, let's get in business with the plant and we'll figure it out as we go. And it was an accelerator. but highly focused and not dependent on me. So check those 2 boxes, theoretically. The first company, up and down in 9 months, epic failure, right? When your unit economic goes from $7,500 a unit to 200, you're dead. So first company's dead. Second company, dead, right? Third company works. Fourth company, who knows? Fourth company is just went back into hibernation. That company has no operating team. It's currently engaged in pursuit of a license to grow marijuana for the Drug Enforcement Agency. I know, strange. When I brought that to the board, they were like, what? So my job has been here in identifying, for a minute I ended up in the operating chair because I had to. Tanya, she just could not, no one was equipped during the pandemic, really, right? I mean, so we had just come off of the first company tanking horribly. Pandemic hits, I end up in the chair, and we end up essentially making 2 strategic decisions. One was that we were simply not going to touch the gray market. So we were going to be a white hat, which is very difficult to do, and we did at our own financial peril several times, and that we were going to do the hardest thing first, so that we were going to put standards in place for our company that would be at or above any regulatory that we would ever see when this plant became legal. And so that is what drives this. That's why this can go into Whole Foods right now, right? Because we never started downstream. We always started with, let's do the hardest thing first. And if we can do that and we can play the game, the long game, we're going to be fine. Now, we've done, sometimes I wished we had touched the gray market, but we didn't. And so for me now, kind of coming off of this last little run, we raised about $11 million over the course of this period. And I largely, that was done by a couple of us, right? And where we are now is this company is now spun out. It's its own entity. It was part of the holding company. So now it's independent of us. I sit on its board, which is where I would prefer, not in an operating chair. And now the company, we just secured a deal. Actually, they called us. Walmart came to us and said, we consider you a top 5 national brand in the mocktail space, which, I mean, we're this puny little company with 5 people. I mean, we are, we're a giant. And they wanted to put us in 1,300 stores. We said, no, we're going into 5, right? But that turned—
5 or 500?
500.
Okay.
So that company has gone from, do we have product market fit, to we are fine. Now we're funding an execution play, right? It's really just now about growth. And so my role going forward will not be fundraising, because it's not my company. Drea Grushel runs the business and she's running it really well. My job is to support her, right? And to support those efforts. My job is to make sure that our investors stay informed. And should our little DEA boondoggle, which we are now 42 months and $2.7 million into, if that were to turn, I'm knocking on every piece of wood I can find. I already know what's going to happen to that company. We're going to sell it to a pharmaceutical business, and they're going to pay us an enormous amount of money up front. And then they're going to give us a 5% carry in everything that company ever does. And that will be a lot of money.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Right? And so, but that company has been nearly dead or dead. Remember the Monty Python bit? I'm only mostly dead. So we've been mostly dead several times. And yet it's about back to you. There is no other way, right? At some point you give up, but it takes a hell of a lot to do it. It takes a hell of a lot to knock someone like you or someone like me out of the box, because I didn't get this far to fall on my sword because it doesn't look good until it truly is time to fall on your sword.
So this has been fantastic. Parting question. speaking of that idea, this notion, you could call it perseverance, you could call it grit, insanity is a word you used earlier, stubbornness. I mean, what is it about Mark Montgomery, the old Mark Montgomery, the current Mark Montgomery, the teenager mowing grass? What is it that still fuels, I'll call it ambition, hope, pick a word. We've talked about family. We have talked about not exactly revenge, but at least doing things the way you want them done or to do them. If you had to sum up any of that, this journey, what is it that allows you to keep doing this, how you want to do it moving forward?
For a long time, I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to die when my wife died. And if my kid had not been around, I would probably not be here. I would have done it in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I did not think I could go on. And that might be insanity unto itself, but it is what it is. I think so a couple things. One, I think this hustle culture that is entrepreneurship, all of this mythology and all this stuff around entrepreneurship, I have come to reject a lot of that. I think a lot of it's bullshit. And I think if you're doing something at the peril of things you've already signed up for, family specifically, you shouldn't be doing that. If you're going to have a family, have it. Be that person, be present. So right now, part of what I'm doing is I'm not on I have very clear lines. I am not available before 8 a.m. and I'm not available after 5, and I'm not available on weekends, and I don't work Fridays. Right? Sorry. If you need anything else, you're going to have to go somewhere else for it. So I think that what I would say now for me is I have intentionally slowed myself down, and I feel like there is a market advantage to that I have not yet put my finger on, but I think there's value in it. And so I look at my path now, and I say, I've made one very, I think, distinct decision that it's now going to be on the record. So we'll see if I do it. I'm not going to start something else. I'm 58. It's 10 years. I am not going to be grinding at 68 years old. So what can I do? And I think the answer to that is, I think I have a lot of knowledge that can be applied and be force multiplier for others. And so how do I bring what I am good at and what I have some track record and some proof that I'm good at it, and how do I bring that to people who need it, and not just for profit. So I really have spent a bunch of time working with nonprofits. I've got 3, and I don't know where that's going to lead me, but I'm super interested in it because I can see how what I bring can help and create more impact. And it's not about making money, right? It's about changing people's lives. It's about using these skills. Now, will I still participate in private deals? Yes, absolutely. I just signed up to be chief strategy officer fractional for a guy who's got a company that's growing. It's 2xing every month. Wow. Right? So I can help him. Yeah. And I'll make some money on that. But I don't have to that doesn't have to be the focus. I can hawk better than booze, right? But I can also work with W.O. Smith School on a big transition. So for me, it's about that. And then the other thing, and I'll just close with this. I moved here to make money in music in 1990. At 58 years old, I have made my first real money as a composer in music. Wow. And so that Friday that I don't work is spent all day creating music. Oh, wow. Write, record, release. And I've been doing it for 2 years and not saying a word to anybody. And we just signed our first deal for 10 masters that I think are going to show up in film and television.
Fantastic.
And so the guitar player from 1990
did
is
it.
still the
That's
guitar
right.
player from 1990.
Man, that's amazing. Well, on that note, thank you. Thanks for
Hey,
making
thank
time.
you. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for telling your story. Thanks for all you've done for the EC, all you've done for Nashville, and especially for the time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Circle Back. My guest today was Mark Montgomery. I hope you enjoyed listening to that interview as much as I did. As always, a big thanks to the Beth and Randy Chase family for their support with Circle Back, and also a big thank you to our friends at Nashville Post. Be sure to follow, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll see you next time.